What's up guys, Zero Skater here, and today I'll be bringing you my first competitive Unmatched tier list. We're in a bit of a lull with set releases, waiting on the new Marvel and Battle of Legends Volume 2 sets to drop, so I figured it'd be the perfect opportunity to go ahead and take a look at the current roster. Now, we also had the first big competitive Unmatched tournament conclude back in March, and so we have a bit of a more realistic idea of where these fighters actually stand in regards to the rest of the lineup. Now, if you haven't seen that footage already, go ahead and check out the link in the description below for some quality high-level Unmatched gameplay. Also, make sure you guys attack that like button if you enjoyed the video and subscribe for more Unmatched content. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into the tier list. Okay, so to start things off here, I separated everything into top tier, high mid tier, low mid tier, and bottom tier. So bottom tier is where we're going to start. We'll be working our way up, and for bottom tier, really these heroes are the ones that you probably don't want to be bringing to a tournament. They have some pretty glaring weaknesses and are definitely not on the same level as the rest of the cast. So starting with the worst of the worst, I'm sure you can guess it's gonna be Spike. So Spike really has basically no ability. That's his major weakness. The shadow tokens are supposed to provide buffs and extra effects on his cards, but the thing is, they only work if the opponent chooses to end adjacent to Spike, which they can basically decide to never do throughout the course of the game. And that is really his biggest problem. So he's basically just a deck full of blank cards, just values, no effects. And so, you know, everybody else having effects, they're just going to be in a different league than poor Spike here. In addition to that, he has no way to pass actions other than two Drusilla schemes, which are the Sight, and if she gets killed off early, then that's going to be 0 passes for Spike. So he really has no way to force the opponent to come to him. He is going to have to be the aggressor, and with blank cards, with just pure values, he can't really do too much with that. And next up we are going to have Willow, which is probably not a surprise to anybody, but Willow's main problem really is just she relies too much on RNG for her damage output. Because with the blind boosts, you could hit a 3 or you could hit a 1. And you really have no control over that other than Hacker, which is really a mediocre way of trying to control those outcomes. So with blind boosting, also you're just going to hit exhaustion so quickly. You might only get to play 2/3 of your deck when your opponent gets to play their whole thing. So, you know, you just run out of stuff. In addition to that, she has a very low number of defenses, so she can be really weak to combo characters like Bruce Lee and Raptors, who can knock those defenses out quickly and leave her with nothing to defend with. So a combination of the low number of defenses and those blind boosts burning through her deck, Willow's really on a short fuse. She can't really play the long game. She's got to play pretty quickly and aggressively, and there's just so much RNG. So to really be successful, you probably have to use Terra as a perfect meat shield and soak up a lot of attacks, and in addition to that, you're going to have to pull off a lot of recycling of your cards with her knowledge of the craft so that you have enough cards to actually close out the game. And speaking of low defenses, next up we are going to have Angel. To be honest, I'm a little iffy on this one. I don't have a ton of experience with Angel playing as or against him, but from what I've seen so far, I really don't have much faith in him at all. His low defenses just make it so easy to start getting direct damage attacks in on him, and although he has huge damage output with Faith, she's so easy to kill that you can negate a lot of that damage. In addition, he has a low card movement. He doesn't have any skirmishes or leapaways. He's got a couple of disengages, but that can be feinted, and his defensive disengage, you know, haunted by the faces, can be played around because he only gets to move if he loses the combat. So, in addition, his ability I think is just too inconsistent to work right. His 5s are actually kind of bad because you don't get to draw off of them, and there's so many, but when somebody defends with a 4 like a skirmish and you just take 1 point of damage and he doesn't get to draw, he can't keep up the pressure, he's going to gas out. So I really don't have too much faith in Angel, but I definitely could be wrong about this one, but for now I'm going to put him in the bottom tier. And rounding out the bottom tier, I'm sure you can guess it, it's going to be King Arthur. I have a little bit more faith in King Arthur after the last Weekend Warriors. If you guys haven't seen that, go check out my previous video. I think having at least one good matchup against a popular and powerful fighter like Little Red definitely bumped Arthur up just a little bit, at least in my eyes. Let me know what you guys think down in the comments, but King Arthur, his biggest, weakness is he's got terrible mobility. His boost values are so low because of his ability. They didn't want him to be able to swing for ridiculous, powerful attacks all the time, so they lowered a lot of his boost values, which just really hurts his mobility. And the fact that his ability can be canceled by feints is just it makes it so risky that it's not even worth doing most of the time, unless maybe you're attacking with Excalibur and you want to bait a feint. But the ability is just too risky. His mobility is awful. On the plus side, he's got a big health total and can potentially deal some huge damage with his boosts if you can run them out of feints, or in the case of Invisible Man or Little Red where they don't have a set of feints like most fighters, it can be a little bit better. But also, you got Merlin. He has some really strong schemes, and he's a ranged sidekick, which can use Momentous Shift, so that's really powerful. So you do have a couple of good things going for you as King Arthur, but overall, he's just a little bit weaker on the power level than the rest of the cast. Alright, so that'll do it for the bottom tier, and next up we're going to be moving on to the low-mid tier. Now, fighters in this tier I think are definitely a step above these bottom tier characters, and you could have some success with them in a tournament setting, I believe, but it's going to be a little bit more inconsistent than some of the fighters in the higher tiers. Okay, so to start the low-mid tier, I know a lot of you guys are going to hate me for this one, but I'm going to go with the Raptors. I know a lot of people love Raptors, they're really fun to play, but they're just so inconsistent that I am going to put them in the low-mid tier. One of their biggest weaknesses is their low number of defenses, like much of the bottom tier characters. Also, they have very low health per Raptor at only 7 apiece, and they get significantly worse whenever one of the Raptors dies off. And when a second Raptor dies off, you've basically lost the game at that point. So they they're really good in the early game, but they fizzle out very quickly. Obviously, their strengths, though, are they have huge combo potential, and they're very aggressive. They have a lot of gain action attacks. They get buffs when you have multiple Raptors surrounding your target. So they're very scary to play against, but they're just going to fizzle out very quickly. And that makes them glass cannons. I mean, they're risky. They could always win any matchup, but I just think it's too risky to consider them any higher on the tier list if we're talking about playing fighters in a tournament setting. Okay, next up, and although it hurts me to put him this low, it's going to be my favorite guy, Jekyll and Hyde. So, much like Raptors, Jekyll is just kind of inconsistent, especially against aggressive fighters who can knock those defenses out of his hand and force him on the back foot. He has low mobility if the opponent plays around pure evil, which a good opponent will, and he's very difficult to play. One of the most difficult in the game, I would say. You have to be adaptable. You got to be able to recognize moments where you need to be aggressive and take that point of damage as Hyde to maneuver and maybe even boost, but there's a lot of decision points, and you really have to play him optimally to have success. So he's one of the most difficult. He's very predictable in combat because you can only play half of his deck at a time, so the opponent has a lot less options to worry about when it comes to combat. But really, his deck is OP, and that's really just the benefit you get from having an ability that is basically a detriment. He's very versatile. He can play the long game, he can play the short game, he can really just do it all. So he is very powerful, but quite inconsistent. So for that reason, I'm going to have to put Jekyll in the low-mid tier. And rounding out the low-mid tier, another fan favorite. I'm going to get a lot of pushback from this one, I'm sure, but I'm going to put Bruce Lee. So Bruce Lee is a bit more of a consistent combo character than the Raptors, because where the Raptors have to expend their hand and pull back to find more combo cards, Bruce can use them and then just be attacked and defend with Be Like Waters to get the Jeets back to his hand for more combos. So he is more of a smooth, consistent combo character than Raptors, so I'm going to put him a little bit higher. He has a lot of mobility, huge boost values, so he can get around the board very easily. And he can nearly always avoid being double attacked with his ability, jumping back at the end of the turn, so he is consistent in the damage that he is going to be taking from the opponent's counter attack, because he can control that a little bit. But on the downside, he has low health at only 14. He has no healing at all. and he has no sidekick, so all of the opponent's damage is going to be targeting Bruce himself. So with all those things said, low health, no healing, all damage targeting him, he's going to have a rough time against really heavy hitters like Bigfoot or maybe Jekyll and Hyde or Dracula. So, but overall, he's more of a consistent combo character than the Raptors, and so I'm going to put Bruce at the top of the low mid tier. And next up, we're going to be moving into the high mid tier. Now, the fighters in this tier, I believe, are similar in power level to the low mid tier, although a bit more consistent. Generally speaking, I think they have more even matchup spreads across the board, so they're pretty safe picks when it comes to tournament play, and as such, I put them just a step above the low mid tiers. So to kick things off with the high mid tier, we're going to go with the exception to the rule that I just stated with the consistent and even matchup spreads, and we're going to go with one of my favorites. It's going to be Invisible Man. Now, a lot of you might be a bit surprised to see him this high, but I have played a lot of Invisible Man, and he is definitely underrated. He has a lot of great matchups against popular, powerful fighters like Muldoon, like Robin Hood, Dracula, Alice. He's not even too bad against Bigfoot, believe it or not. So he's got some great matchups against popular fighters. He does have some really bad ones too, like Sherlock is just horrible. You got Medusa and Little Red and Beowulf that can give him a lot of trouble as well. So he's very polarizing, but he can be a great counter pick for tournament play. Now, looking at his strengths, I mean, he has high mobility and defenses with his fog tokens. He's got some of the highest auto damage in the game at 10 points of damage. He's got the most passes in the game. So that makes him one of, if not the best fatigue fighter out there. So he has a lot of things going for him. But on the flip side, he has a very low number and quality of attack cards. He has no cancels with only 2 impossible to seize. He is also very difficult to play. There's really no room for error when playing Invisible Man. Now, if the opponent doesn't know how to play against him, you can have an easy time fatiguing them, but if they're familiar with him and his gameplay, then you're going to have to be very careful with your fog placements, you're going to have to be counting cards, and you're going to really have to be very familiar with every individual matchup that you're going up against. So, if you can do all these things and play optimally, you're going to have a great time against some of the very powerful and popular fighters in Unmatched. Next up, we're going to be staying more true to what I said earlier with the consistent and even matchup spreads, and we're going to go with Buffy. So Buffy is very versatile, especially due to her sidekick choice of Giles or Xander. You get to pick your sidekick after you see who the opponent is playing, so that's a big advantage. With Giles, you can play more towards fatigue or hand control if needed. If there's key cards like Beast Form or Vanish that you need to hit out of the opponent's hand, you can do so. Or if you need to have more aggression and positioning options, maybe against somebody like Sherlock or Muldoon, you might want to play Xander. So that gives her a lot of options. She's very well-rounded. She has a lot of high attack and defense values, a lot of versatile cards, so she never really gets caught without options. And she has excellent mobility. Her base movement speed is 3, which is very good. Her boost values are all quite high, and her ability lets her move through opposing fighters. So she really is totally free when it comes to moving wherever she pleases. And the only downside I would really say to Buffy is she's quite predictable. I think she doesn't really have any real tricks. Her card effects are very basic, and there's not really any room for real mind games or fake outs like there would be maybe with some other fighters. So she's quite predictable in what she does, but she does it quite well. And next up, we're going to have Alice. I know a lot of people playtest their custom characters against Alice, and I would say for good reason. I mean, she's relatively consistent and kind of basic in terms of her fundamentals. And she has huge potential damage, though, with that ability of hers. Adding +2 damage to all of her attacks is just huge. The +1 defense is good as well, but not nearly as impactful as that attack damage. Now, she also has really good mobility with a lot of high boost values and a lot of movement effects on her cards. So she can break combos, she can, move around as she needs to. The only thing is it's kind of tricky to time her size changes optimally. You really need to think ahead, a lot like Jekyll and Hyde, but if you can do so, you can have huge payoffs with that ability. And also, she has a Jabberwock who is ridiculously strong on attack. He's got a lot of health as well, but the only thing is he has low defenses and none specific to him. So anything that he's defending with, you're taking away from Alice. So that can be pretty big. And in addition to that, Alice has really low starting health at only 13. and her only healing, although it's very, very good in the Looking Glass, it does require combat in order to trigger. So she's a little bit weak against some of the explosive characters like Dracula or Jekyll and Hyde, who can kill her before she has a chance to pull off that ability. But outside of those, she has really even matchups across the board, and I would be very comfortable picking Alice into anybody on the roster. Now to finish up the high mid tier, we're going to go with another fan favorite, and that's going to be Little Red. So Little Red's one of the newer fighters in Unmatched, but after being played by Bug Hunter in the tournament, he really showed what Little Red can do. So, I mean, she has tons of potential auto damage, some of the most in the game. She has huge attacks with Huntsman and healing as well. I mean, 8+ points of healing throughout the game, depending on how you play it, is just huge. Now, Huntsman has really high health himself as well, so he's pretty beefy, but the thing is he has very little defense, so if the opponent targets him and takes him out early, Red's going to lose a lot of potential damage and healing throughout that game, so it can be pretty difficult also to time your cards, because the opponent can really exploit her weak moments, because when she has the wrong symbol in the basket, that it kind of gives them a free pass to go and do their heavy hits at that time, because you know, if maybe the Wolf's Pelt is in the basket, you want to go for your big attacks because you know, A, the Wolfsbane's not in there, so what big eyes you have can't ignore the value completely. And also, you're not going to be able to use Stones in the Belly to pull out a card out of the opponent's hand and buff the defense value. So, you know, when Pelt is in the basket, it's a great time for the opponent to go in for the attack, so they can really exploit those weak moments. But otherwise, Little Red, overall, I mean, she's got tons of potential. She does really well against a lot of different matchups, and she's definitely deserves her place here in the high mid tier. And next up, we're going to be moving into the high tier fighters. Now, these are the ones you are going to see most often in tournament play because they're really just a step above the rest in terms of power level. They have more strengths, less weaknesses, and an overall better matchup spread and win rates across the board. So the first of the high tiers, in my opinion, is going to be Beowulf. And I know this might be a little controversial. I think a lot of people thought that Little Red was the better of the two when that set released. But I think Beowulf just has some better matchups against the top tier and high tier fighters. He's pretty decent against all of the big three in my experience, so that's definitely a plus. Beowulf has huge attacks, you know, with Heirloom. It can't even be canceled, so there's nothing the opponent can do about that. And he also has high health and a lot of passes and some healing as well, so he can definitely play the long game. Wiglaf is a high health meat shield there with 9 health, and he's not even bad to lose because, you know, his cards are pretty weak, so you don't even care. You just use him as boosts once he's gone anyways. Beowulf on the flip side, he has some low movement effects with only a few skirmishes. His base movement speed is only 2, so that's not that great. But he also has a low number of defenses, so you're going to have to take some undefended hits. That's just the nature of the beast. So that can be a good thing sometimes, though. You know, if you take an undefended regroup or a feint and you gain rage for it, and you'll be very happy about that. So it's a little tricky, but it can be done. And sometimes even if you do have defense, you want to hold on to it, you know. So don't just toss defense at every attack that comes your way. You're going to have to take some hits, but be confident. The opponent's going to be just as scared of you as you are of them. So even if you don't have defense in hand, stand your ground. And Beowulf, I think, definitely deserves his spot in the high tier. And then next up for the high tiers, we're going to have Robin Hood. So Robin Hood is easily equipped to be one of the most aggressive fighters in the game, maybe outside of Raptors. But he has tons of card draw, and he can safely attack multiple times without having to do that maneuver to get away because of his ability that lets him hop back after every attack. So he can attack twice and still get away and feel good about it. So one of the most aggressive fighters in the game, that's for sure. He's hard to reach because he has a bunch of sidekicks, being the Outlaws, to block the path of the opponent. And also, the Outlaws have the biggest mind game in the game, honestly. When they're attacking with, you know, highway robbery, that's huge. If you defend with any standard card that's not a cancel against a highway robbery, and you just lose your whole card, it just gets blanked for nothing, you feel terrible about that. So in that case, it's like, well, you might as well have just not even defended. But then if you start to not defend and they catch on to that and they switch it up and they attack you with something like you know, an ambush or a wily fighting, and you take big damage undefended, you feel really bad about that too. So the Outlaws are just a menace in terms of mind games. Robin's weaknesses, he's got low value defenses. They cap out at 3s. So if you can reach him and attack him with some big hits, you're going to deal some damage. And he has low starting health and no healing. So that is his weak point. His defenses are low, his health is low, but it's hard to reach him because of the outlaws. So, and also, you don't want to just run into Robin Hood and get double attacked and just blown away, So you're going to have defense yourself to even feel comfortable going in to attack him. So it's pretty tricky. Robin is definitely one of the high tiers, one of the most aggressive in the lineup, and definitely someone to watch out for in tournament play. And next up, probably the most consistent fighter in the high tier, I'm going to put Sinbad. Sinbad, he pretty much plays his same game every time, and unless you can kill him early, there's not really much you can do about that. He's incredible in the late game with those huge voyage attacks and ridiculous movement. You just can't get away. Every turn, he's going to maneuver and attack, and you're going to have to run away, and then he's going to maneuver and attack. And so he's just consistently applying pressure in that late game with massive attacks. It's very devastating. He also has high card draw, so he can keep up aggressive play. You don't necessarily want to pin him because if he has riches beyond compare and he draws 3 cards off of 1 card, I mean, he can sustain a lot longer probably than you can hold that pin. He also has lots of high value versatiles for defense, so he's never really caught without defense, and that just, again, makes him very consistent of a fighter. I mean, his weaknesses are that he starts off weak, his voyages are weak at only 2 baseline, and it takes time to build them up into the discard pile, but and you also might not even draw them early game, so the early game is when you really have to take advantage of Sinbad while he's at his weak point, because if you let the game go long and he builds up that power, there's not really much you can do to stop him. Another thing to note is that all his boost values are only a value of 1, so that can be exploited, especially in the early game, because if you want to, build up your hand or be really aggressive at first and then back off, you can back off to a point where guaranteed that he can't reach you because his boost values are all so low. And if he doesn't have the voyages in the discard, he doesn't have that movement built up yet as well. So he's very linear, but he is very, very good at what he does. And that brings us to the top 5 fighters in Unmatched. And number 5 I'm going to put is Dracula. So Dracula is definitely one of the scariest fighters to play against in Unmatched. He's very difficult to play as, to pilot him, but he can create lethal scenarios better than anyone else in the entire game, bar none. Beast Form is just a monster of a card. Being able to cap out at 13 attack for a single attack is just ridiculous. If you're at 9 health and your best defense is a skirmish at a value of 4, the Beast Form can still just kill you over that, which is just insane. So he's very scary. He has a lot of auto damage and potential healing with his schemes, a lot of passes as well, so he can play a pretty long game. He also has excellent deterrent to the opponent. You don't want to just go up and attack Dracula, especially if you're melee, because you don't want to take that free auto damage and give him a free card powering up his potential Beast Forms. So in addition to the ability, I mean, Do My Bidding is just a heck of a card. Being able to return the attack card back to hand that the opponent wanted to play and pull out their feint, and then you have full hand knowledge to guarantee that your Beast Form is going to pull off the way you want it to, is just a ridiculous 1-2 lethal punch. So Do My Bidding and Beast Form combo is insane. On top of that, the Sisters are really valuable sidekicks. Although they are difficult to keep alive at only 1 health and not a lot of great defenses, so if the opponent can pick them off before you can pull out some of your Ravening Seductions, that's definitely going to give them an easier time against Dracula, but also Dracula doesn't have as great attack options outside of Beast Form and Ambush, so it's harder to bait feints as Dracula, but if you can do so, again, that Beast Form is just going to be ridiculous lethal combo. Also, Dracula needs to keep a high hand size in order to keep that Beast Form threat at its peak. And if the opponent can be aggressive, it's easier from ranged because you don't have to deal with his ability. But if they can just knock those defenses out of Dracula's hand and keep his hand size low, they're going to have a bit easier of a time. But overall, I think Dracula is a very scary fighter to play against. He has ridiculous potential with those Beast Form lethals, and so that's why I'm going to give him my number 5 spot. And next up at number 4, love him or hate him, it's Muldoon. So Muldoon was definitely the most represented character in the recent tournament. He had the highest win rate overall, even amongst the big 3, so he's definitely proven his worth. Muldoon is the only fighter who is ranged with all ranged sidekicks, so that's a big advantage there. And he has the most 1 health sidekicks in the game, with Call for Backup being able to revive all 3 at one time and having 2 copies of that card. You can have a total of 9 1 health sidekicks throughout the game. So pair that up with his traps, and he definitely has the best map control out of anybody. In addition to that, his rending shots and leapaways allow you to move the opponent pretty easily, so his board control is just truly unmatched. Now, in addition to that, he's got really high attack potential with a lot of powerful 4s, and even shooter can be a 5, and the auto damage too from the traps. You can have up to 8 auto damage throughout a game, so that's just really big. His damage potential is through the roof. He's really oppressive against most of the cast, I would say. And he's also really strong into Bigfoot, who is widely considered one of the best fighters, if not the best fighter in the game. So a great matchup there into the big 3. So the only real weakness Muldoon has is his low health. I mean, he starts at 14, he's got no healing, and really he has very low defenses. I think the lowest in the game, only 8 total cards, because we're going to go 2 of the blue 4s, 3 leapaways, that makes 5 4s, and then you got 3 feints, and we're not going to count the regroups. So definitely lacking on the defense. He can be pretty weak to ranged fighters like Robin Hood and Medusa, but other than that, again, he's pretty oppressive against the majority of the cast. So he's not unbeatable, but a really good Muldoon player is going to give you a very, very hard time of being able to reach him and actually get through those high defenses that he has. So that's why I'm going to give Muldoon the number 4 slot. And that's going to wrap it up for the high tier characters. And we are going to be moving on to the top tier, otherwise known as the Big 3. I'm sure you know them, so here we go. Alright, so the first of the Big 3 is going to be Sherlock Holmes. Now, I have heard some arguments lately that Sherlock may not even be on the same level as Bigfoot and Medusa, but I would definitely say he is. If you disagree, let me know, and maybe we can play sometime and I can try and change your mind. Maybe you haven't played against a good enough Sherlock player. But regardless, I mean, Sherlock has the most hand disruption in the whole game, and honestly, hand knowledge wins games. Because when you know what your opponent's options are, it's so much easier for you to make the more optimal play yourself. And on top of that, his auto damage potential is just ridiculous. He can win most matchups without even attacking, so that's just crazy. And his high health of 16, along with some of the best defenses in the game, make him just so difficult to actually take out. I mean, you got Elementary with a blue card, which can just completely blank your opponent's card if you call the right value. You got Deduce Strategy, which is basically an impossible to see, because most cards, their boost values are lower than their printed values, and often not higher than a 3. So that can basically just nullify most attacks, honestly. And then you got your standard set of 3 feints. So Sherlock's defenses are ridiculous. He's got Watson, who's an incredibly strong sidekick. He's got 8 health. He's got some strong attacks being his 5s, and he's also ranged. And on top of that, he's got some defenses specific to him that can even provide some healing. So he's definitely a good sidekick there. And Sherlock admittedly is a bit more difficult to play optimally, because you need advanced knowledge of not only your own deck, but also your opponent's deck, so that you can figure out your win condition, you know. But if you can play him optimally, Sherlock is just a force to be reckoned with. His only real weakness is he can be weak to aggression due to low card draw effects, being Education Never Ends is his only one, and that's also situational depending on the outcome of the combat. So you can catch him without defense sometimes if you can keep up the aggression, but it's just very difficult to do. So with all that said, that's why Sherlock is going to be, in my opinion, deserving of his spot in the Big 3. And guys, now we are down to the last 2 fighters in the tier list. Who's better, Medusa or Bigfoot? Well, in my opinion, I'm going to put Bigfoot as number 2. This might be a surprise to a lot of people. Many think that he is the number 1 fighter in the game, and I think it's close. I had a lot of personal debate, you know, but ultimately I do think the Medusa is a little bit stronger. Now, when it comes to Bigfoot, he's obviously overpowered. I mean, his card values are crazy. He's got the highest card values, I think, in the game, and he's got so many versatiles that he almost has no weaknesses, right? He always does the same thing. He's going to beat you with higher card values than you have, and not much you can do about it. He has the most cancels in the game. He's got his standard set of 3 feints on top of the 2 super feints, I call them, with the It's Just Your Imagination. And then you got Jackalope, who is like the safest and easiest auto damage dealer in the game with those Jackalope horns. That's 6 auto damage in the deck, which is a decent amount. And but it gives you movement, so you can do that first, and then you can either choose to attack and keep up the aggression, or you can pull him back to safety again. It's not like you know, some of maybe Dracula's auto damage cards, or Invisible Man's, or Jekyll and Hyde, or even Medusa, who has to maybe move into range and then do the scheme, and then she's stuck, you know, maybe closer to you. But Jackalope can just use the scheme, deal the damage, and run back, so it's always safe. Jackalope can also use every card in the deck, basically, because there's so many Ennies. The only Jackalope-specific card is that scheme of the horns, but there's so many Ennies in the deck, even the super feints. It's just crazy there. And Bigfoot's ability is ridiculous. I mean, it gives him a free card draw whenever he wants it, because it's the end of the turn. That means the opponent really has no way to truly play around it. They can try to set up, if they have multiple sidekicks, you know, and place in different zones to try and provide coverage in different zones. But if Bigfoot moves up and attacks anybody, any 1-health sidekick with a big attack, you know, a momentous shift, or even one of his logs, his 6s, he guarantees the kill on that sidekick, and then he gets his card draw. So it's basically free whenever he wants it. So that's just crazy. His only real weakness is that he's predictable. I mean, he's going to do the same thing every game. He's going to just beat you with his overpowered card values. There's not a lot of tricks to Bigfoot, but it's just that he's so powerful and his cards are so good and overstated that he's just likely to win. So, I mean, there you have it. That's Bigfoot. He's just a big brute. He's overpowered, but hopefully they can come out with some counters to him, because he's definitely a menace and definitely one of the top 2 fighters in the game. And that's going to bring us to our number 1 fighter in Unmatched. It's going to be Medusa. So Medusa just has so much going for her. I mean, look at her. She's ranged. She has multiple sidekicks that are actually difficult to kill because they have 4-value cards specific to them, on top of multiple 3s that even provide discard. So that's kind of a deterrent there. She has high mobility with her base movement of 3. And her boost values are just insane. I mean, most decks don't even have any cards with a boost value of 4, but Medusa has, what, 5 of them in her deck. And combine that with her ridiculous damage output from things like Second Shot, which can use those high boost values to bump it up to a 7. You got Momentary Glance, which can deal up to 4 auto damage from range. And you got your ability to ping people whenever they end in your zone. So the damage output is insane. It's hard to attack her because A, she's ranged, B, you have the Harpies to surround you and block the opponent off from even being able to get to you. And then it's like, even if you could get to her, well, you're going to take damage from her ability most likely. And that threat of her double attacking you from ranged in retaliation is just huge, because if you run out of defenses, you could get hit by a Gaze of Stone. I mean, just look, she's got the most discards in the game. She's got, that's 6 discards. Granted, you get to pick what you discard, but still 6 cards out of 30, that's 20% of your deck gone that you don't even get to play. She's great at the late game. She has a lot of passes, and along with those discards and the multi-sidekicks, being able to soak up attacks. And then once she whittles you down to basically nothing and you have no defenses left, she can hit you with a Gaze of Stone to finish out the game when she knows it's going to work. So her late game is just insane. One tiny little weakness that she has, I guess, is that her attacks aren't going to be greater than a 3 value as long as you can cancel them, because Second Shot is the only attack that really gets higher than that because of the boost. If you cancel it, then it's only stuck at a 3. So I mean, that's kind of good, you know, for Bigfoot. That's why Bigfoot is probably the best fighter into Medusa. But again, he's also in contention for the best fighter in the game, so everybody else is kind of out of luck. The number 1 biggest thing, though, The reason why I put Medusa higher than Bigfoot on the tier list is because of the threat of Gaze of Stone. So you basically have to defend every attack Medusa throws at you. So she's able to bait with you, she can use regroups, she can use feints, she can use dashes or snipes, all these little attacks. But you have to defend every single one, because if you don't and it's a Stone Gaze, you're just dead. And that threat is greater than anything that really any of the other fighters have, and I think is the one thing that really makes her stand out above the rest of the pack. I think Bigfoot would be the best in the game if it weren't for the threat of Stone Gaze from Medusa. If you could feel okay taking undefended attacks against Medusa, it would be a different story, but that's not the case. So just that threat alone, I think, is enough to push her up to the top and to the #1 spot. And there you have it, guys. That's going to be my first competitive unmatched tier list here. So just to recap, I mean, you got the top tier, otherwise known as the Big Three, who are just dominating the scene. They are most often going to draw the bans in a tournament. Then you got your high tiers, which you're going to see a lot more of in a tournament setting because of the Big Three getting banned most often. So these are the ones you really got to look out for and play around. You're going to want to have your counter picks ready for these guys. Then you got your high mids, which you could definitely see in a tournament setting. They're all pretty well-rounded and don't necessarily lose real hard to any matchup, with the exception being Invisible Man, who is definitely very polarized but is a great counter pick. And then you got your low mid tiers, so they're probably going to be seen less often in a tournament setting because they're a bit more inconsistent. And then you got your bottom tiers, which are just not equipped to deal with the competitive nature of a tournament setting. They just have too many weaknesses, not enough going for them, so these are more or less going to be kind of forgotten, sadly, at least in terms of a tournament. So there you have it. That is going to be the tier list. I think anybody from low mid tier and above can compete at least in a tournament. I think you could feel okay picking any of them into certain matchups at least. So that's going to wrap it up for today's video, guys. Let me know down in the comments what you think, whether you agree or disagree with my thoughts. The tier list is definitely controversial because nobody can really say for sure. This is just my opinion. It is based off of, the tournament results and my own personal experiences and thoughts, but it can definitely change moving forward with new fighters being released. So we'll have to see how it shapes up in the future. But again, if you enjoyed the video, be sure to like and subscribe for more Unmatched content. Thanks again for watching. I'm ZeroSkater12, and I'll see you next time.